In any event, welcome everyone to the McLaughlin College Union Inaugural Debate. We're going to be examining the question, will the COVID-19 pandemic change inconvertibly the future of higher education from the traditional in-person on-site mode of delivery to remote and or online virtual modes of delivery? And we have four distinguished speakers: Norma Fisher-Stitt, David Leyton-Brown, Charles Hopkins, and Jennine Rawana, and they'll make their arguments for and against this particular proposition. And we're going to start with Norma Fisher-Stitt.
Thank you very much, Professor Simeon, and hello everyone. I'm very happy to be involved in today's debate on the question that has already been outlined. And I'm arguing in favor of the proposition. As we know, our academic world was dramatically changed in March 2020, when all in-person classes were suspended at York University and many other places. The radical disruption to all aspects of our lives spilled over into how we teach and learn, as classes shifted from being offered in person on campus to being offered remotely. The adjustment was challenging and continues to present challenges, including missing our in-person spontaneous connections. But we also have come to see many advantages associated with our requisite distancing from one another and remote online course delivery. For the reasons that I will put forward, I believe that the future of higher education has been and will continue to be inconvertibly changed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Specifically, I see three distinct advantages to remote online teaching and learning. Number one, advantages related to access. Number two, benefits related to pedagogical shifts. And number three, financial benefits. I will address each of these in turn. So number one, advantages related to access. I will focus on three. Point A, ease of access, especially for part-time students. Memorial University reports that their student enrollment has reached an all-time high this fall, showing a 4% increase from last year. A portion of their increase is linked to recruiters reaching out to former students who have not been enrolled for 5 years or more and are halfway through their degree. The online delivery mode is particularly convenient for that demographic, as it is for many other students who have been juggling their studies with working, commuting, and family responsibilities. Not having to commute saves students and faculty members as much as 3 to 4 hours per day here at York University. Like Memorial, other universities might discover that many students who have curtailed their studies will now find it possible to complete their degrees through taking online courses not previously available to them. Which brings me to the second point associated with access. Point B, flexibility. With remote teaching, there is the possibility to offer both asynchronous and synchronous course components. In the traditional class environment, students and instructors usually are expected to be in the same physical space on a specific day and time. If a student is unable to attend, perhaps due to commuting or health issues, they might have access to the class notes or even to the lecture, but they will miss the in-class interactions. Over the past 2 terms, we have learned that there are ways to offer asynchronous class meets at various times to accommodate students located in different time zones, for example. A blend of synchronous and asynchronous class meets has the potential to offer students maximum flexibility. Faculty can pre-record a series of lecture segments that can be viewed repeatedly and augment these with synchronous interactions with individuals or groups of students. This increased flexibility also allows for deeper learning. In the doctoral research I conducted 25 years ago, students with access to a computer tutorial designed to supplement, not supplant, their in-person class experience, told me that they valued the opportunity to review the material as many times as they wished at their own convenience. My third point related to access, point C, is workplace integrated learning and EE placements. Traditionally, it has been assumed that students participating in WIL, WIL, and EE placements would participate in these experiences off campus. Students already overburdened by the demands of school, working, and commuting found it difficult, if not impossible, to participate in EE opportunities. In some cases, the time required to fit in an off-campus experience made this option impossible. Over the past several months, we have discovered that many placements can be completed remotely. Workplaces have shifted how they conduct their business and office interactions, opening up new opportunities for students who previously felt they were unable to participate in workplace integrated learning, or EE. Area 2, benefits related to pedagogical shifts. I will focus on 4. Point A, new collaborations, including open educational resources. Traditionally, faculty members have developed their courses independently, perhaps creating reading kits or requiring the purchase of specific texts. The online world has opened up new possibilities through which journal articles, videos, still images, and audio resources can all be made available to students through various learning management systems. Open educational resources are another aspect of this expansion. OER involve the sharing of materials by faculty members within agreed upon copyright and permission parameters. For example, I can elect to make some of my video modules available to others. I can also insert materials created by others into my course site. Here at York, we have York Space, but there are examples of provincial and national OER initiatives, including a new collaboration called Open Education Alberta that seeks to provide students and instructors with access to free digital learning materials. The platform is the product of a collaboration between post-secondary institutions across the province, including the University of Alberta Libraries, Mount Royal University, MacEwan University, the University of Calgary, University of Lethbridge, and Southern Alberta Institute of Technology. The project co-lead from Mount Royal University has stated that, and I quote, OERs might solve some of the problems that faculty are encountering in terms of student access to learning materials. Point B, introducing a broader range of assignments. How to assess student learning and how to ensure respect for academic integrity are often raised as significant challenges in the online environment. The large midterm or final exam is often a traditional model applied in many courses. And prior to COVID, there was little incentive to question the desirability or effectiveness of these forms of assessment. In the COVID era, the question we are increasingly motivated to ask is, are these the best avenues through which to assess student learning? How else might we ask students to demonstrate their understanding? Pedagogically, posing questions and problems that require thoughtful responses provide an effective, even superior alternative to multiple choice or short answer exams. Open book exams are another viable option in the online world. Point C, establishing expanded opportunities for broader perspectives. Some unexpected bonuses associated with virtual learning have emerged. For example, in an undergraduate course with a fieldwork component, students in the past have visited sites close to the York campus that offer ease of access. This year, to conduct fieldwork, they're being asked to explore a site in their own physical environment, wherever that might be. The result is an expansion of sites, supporting a wider range of examples with broader applications and conversations. And item D is embracing excitement around the new. I believe that many faculty who were reluctant in the past to explore the remote and online teaching environment have discovered that this can be an exciting world, filling their teaching with new possibilities. Western University has shared the stories of several faculty and instructors who have pivoted their courses and shared new remote learning tactics for the new term. Applied mathematics professor Lindy Wall has transformed a course on mathematical biology, for example, into an active learning environment format where students use real-life COVID-19 data to model and predict the patterns of the disease. Kevin Key, Dean of the Faculty of Arts at the University of Ottawa, has stated, if done well, the digital classroom experience can help students learn in new and compelling ways. In the process, students can hone their skills of resilience, self-efficacy, and of course, digital literacy. Here at York, I know many colleagues who have revisioned their courses with imagination and enthusiasm, including those teaching in the studio environment. The learning curve can be steep, but lifelong learning and mastering new skills bring gratification. Area 3, financial benefits. I will focus on 2. A, financially, the ability to remain close to home is a benefit to some students, maybe to many students. Remote learning decreases the need to live near campus and to pay rent. For those who have always commuted, transit or vehicle costs have been substantially decreased. Item B, post-secondary institutions might find that they can reduce their physical footprint or reevaluate the use of existing spaces, adjusting the use of current teaching, office, and residence spaces, and perhaps over time reducing the need for new buildings, thus reducing costs. To conclude, I'll turn my thoughts to those shared by the Dean of Engineering at McMaster University, Ishwari Puri, and I quote, "Our responses to the pandemic are helping us reimagine the future of higher education. Instead of lamenting what's lost, let's focus on what we've gained." Puri identifies 5 opportunities for the future of university education that have been presented by the pandemic. The use of virtual content and activities, increased experiential engagement with students through virtual platforms, the end of the credit hour model of education, broader support for students who are facing financial or health insecurity, and a renewed commitment to listening to students, employers, and communities. He finishes by stating the future of our students deserve, that our students deserve can be fashioned by heeding the lessons learned from experience over the past few months. Thank you for your attention.
James, your mic is muted at the moment, so we can't hear you.
Thank you very much, Norma Sue. Our next speaker is going to be David Leyton-Brown.
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by agreeing with almost everything that Norma Sue Fisher-Stitt has said, except for her conclusion. There are great benefits in terms of access, pedagogy, and even finances to be derived from remote and online learning. But they are not enough in and of themselves to supplant rather than to supplement, to use words that she used. Our topic talks about not a move to a blend of online and in-person education, but a replacement of in-person education by remote and online. And I am happy to argue against the desirability and the prospect of that kind of replacement. I will try to make 3 points. And my first point has been made for me already this afternoon. I was planning to say that in the course of this debate, there will be technical problems. And lo and behold, not even I expected them to be of the magnitude of the Zoom bombing that we experienced. But others of you watching this call will experience lesser technical problems. There might be variable sound volume when we shift from one presenter to another. There might be freezing of a picture or delay of transition from one image to another. Many of those problems will be at your end, namely your receiver because of your particular bandwidth or the settings on your particular device rather than at the transmitting end. But the uneven variability of the online experience is an insurmountable obstacle. It can be reduced, it can be hoped to be gone away, it cannot be totally avoided. And that variability of experience has pernicious socioeconomic inequality associated with it. Studies by the CRTC and the Cybersecurity Policy Exchange have found that lower income households have far less access than higher income households to the online experience. More than 1/4 of all lower income households in Canada either do not have a smartphone or do not have internet access in the home. And even if they do, there tends to be no more than one device in the household, which poses problems as we are seeing at lower levels of education right now with online responses to COVID. Or if they do have the devices, they tend to have much lower data limits, which affects bandwidth, affects stability of the signal, and affects the speed and quality of the learning experience. Now, this is obviously a big problem for York University with its self-conscious and entirely appropriate mission of expanding access to higher education. But it's a challenge to the entire higher educational community, not just in Canada, but worldwide. Educational access only to the well-off is not the future of higher education. Second point that I would like to make is about the educational experience itself. Decades of research in Canada, the United States, and other countries has established the tight connection between active learning and academic success. We know that students will learn more, they will retain that knowledge longer, they will get higher grades, and they will have a higher level of satisfaction with their learning experience if they are active learners. Active learning really has two components. One that happens inside the actual classroom experience, and one that happens outside it. The outside is the follow-up, the engagement with what you have learned, the applying it in the assignments, the research, and the sheer intellectual curiosity with which you engage with your course material. In class, active learning requires interaction with the instructor and interaction with fellow students. And while there are technical and technological possibilities for interaction online, it is also distressingly easy to avoid that interaction. Most of the online interaction tools that we have, the pop quizzes and the clicker responses, are unfortunately at the lowest level of thinking skill. They are sheer yes/no responses, or they are repetition of basic fact. They do not challenge and engage the thinking in a way that is true active learning. Online, especially, education is a terrific thing for the independent learner, for the self-starter. But an educational mode of delivery designed for the best students leaves all but the best students behind and disadvantaged. Nonetheless, governments in our country and others are enormously enthusiastic about the future of online education. If we probe why, it's often for financial reasons. There is an expectation that it will cost less, that it would be possible to deliver the highest quality of instruction presented by the leading figures in their discipline to large numbers of students. But we've had that technology for years. We've had the possibility for the leading figure in a field to organize and present their evidence and argument widely, to accompany that evidence and argument by appropriate visuals, graphs, and supplementary material, to present it asynchronously so that it can be reviewed at the learner's convenience. That technology is called the book. And if a book were all that was needed to present higher education and to experience the benefits of higher education, we wouldn't have needed universities. We would simply have needed publishing houses. We need the interaction that accompanies the delivery of pedagogical content. And to do that online is enormously expensive. That leading figure in the field who delivers the sparkling lecture cannot interact with hundreds, let alone thousands of learners in a massive online course. Yes, you can have the equivalent of tutorial breakout groups led by not that leading figure in the field, but by those who are not the leading figures in the field. And the amount of interaction that occurs would again be variable. Some years ago, the Tri-Council Task Force on Virtual Universities and E-Learning, of which I was a member, established that there were many benefits of the sorts that Norma Sue Fisher-Stitt spoke about in terms of increased access, increased potential of collaboration, new tools. But that task force concluded that exclusively online education was inferior to hybrid education, that the desirable future was a blend of online and face-to-face instruction. The Ontario Council on Graduate Studies, which for over 40 years was the quality assurance mechanism for graduate education in the province of Ontario, stipulated that online graduate programs in Ontario must have an explicit face-to-face component in order to satisfy the criteria of good quality in appraisal processes, because exclusively online learning was not in itself sufficient. My third point, I'll summarize in 2 words: Silicon Valley. And that leave you with a question: why Silicon Valley? If ever there was a candidate for online interaction, it would be the computer and information technology industry. So why is it, not just in the original Silicon Valley, but in Silicon Valleys around the world, such as we see in the Waterloo area here in Canada, that information technology research and production clusters together. There is a synergy of face-to-face interaction, not just in the formal meetings, which are the functional equivalent of formal classroom time, but in the informal interaction, which spurs creativity and spurs progress and spurs competitive advantage for the companies involved. It's certainly not because of the desire for traffic congestion, exorbitant real estate prices, and earthquake dangers that Silicon Valley was established in Silicon Valley in California. It's because of the importance of that personal face-to-face interaction. There have been 85 institutions in the world that have existed more or less unchanged for more than 600 years. If you think for just a moment, that would include the Roman Catholic Church, the British Parliament. But of those 85 institutions, 70 of them are universities. Universities have existed because they work as physical proximity, critical masses of teachers, researchers, and learners. They will continue to require that physical proximity for their core activity, even while we maximize the benefits from remote and online supplementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. We'll now move on to Charles Hopkins.
Great. Thank you very much, James. And my thanks to the previous two speakers, to Norma and David. Let me open with the posit that this digital shift to embrace remote and online virtual modes of delivery in higher education really didn't just start with our COVID response. It's been going on for a number of years, of course. It was already underway, but the pandemic has fueled the transformation. It's forced the speed, the extent of the experimentation, the implementation, and so on. And so I really feel that shift is now fully launched and it's on a permanent journey. So I'll organize my argument around two basic questions that are core to higher education, and then look at intrinsic and extrinsic drivers that will likely influence and perpetuate the change within higher education. So the first question is, what are the perceived purposes of higher education and why would they change? So the one sort of common purpose that is out there is that it's just part of the publicly funded continuation of national educational systems ranging from preschool to lifelong learning. And it's organized according to the needs of the nation's social and largely economic needs, as a fuel for industrial technology and growth. And of course, GDP enhancement is always present in the minds of the funders, right, which is usually government. I'm talking about publicly funded higher education. Another is that it's a standardization mechanism for knowledge. It's a culture keeper, developer. It's a reinforcer and clarifier of norms and values of the society. It regulates access to professions. It's a statement of academic quality, which has implications for social status and class, as well as recognized academic performance standards that have economic and workplace implications. Now, for the individual, as well as enhancing their knowledge and skills, there are many social and economic implications, including access to new aspects and variations of social life, engaging with different worldviews, and making potential lifelong social contacts. So the second question is, who is higher education for currently? And I would say, I don't need to embellish that, but currently higher education is for those individuals who can meet the institution standards, combined with resources and ability to come to the university. So why will all this change? There is a need for an educated public. It has been creeping and creeping, and we can no longer keep this in the hands of a small percentage of elite. Right? The global need to move from the concept of the educated few who will be the elite shaping society to a highly educated and thoughtful public is truly necessary. In fact, due to the ever-increasing changes in our lives and the need for individual and societal resilience, the call is for lifelong learning and continual upskilling as an aspect of societal resilience. Now, this access cannot be left as a perk for those who live within the commute to an education or to a university. In a thought piece in a new UNESCO curated publication titled Humanistic Futures of Learning, one UNESCO chair in ICT and artificial intelligence predicted that the university will be present everywhere and attended at any time. So we can already see with the so-called virtual universities, which will need to accommodate more than half of the world's student population by 2040. UNESCO, World Bank, and so on is putting this out. Now that's 1.2 billion people will be expected to attend post-secondary education, to take a full role in societies. So the sheer numbers alone will develop a huge strain on higher education. So I posit that the higher education is going to be changed. Not every institution, but higher education itself will be changed. There will be some that will be totally online. There will be some that will be blended, and there will be a few that will remain totally face-to-face. Now, beyond the argument addressing sheer numbers, why will the change come and what are the drivers or trends? And I would say, yes, Norma hit upon the finance, and so did David. The reduction in the need for land and property, the reduction in infrastructure, maintenance costs, and so on. And even lab equipment, expensive lab equipment that as the university try to get the latest to be able to have their graduates be on the cutting edge. Even the lab equipment now, the realm of virtual experiments has progressed so greatly that much of this can be online and lectured to by the world's greatest professors, and it's there. Tuition costs are another one, of course, that it can be supplemented by the reducing the need for travel and accommodation and so on in the city. And there is an implication that is already underway of university students in one country taking courses and graduating from another country, such as European countries whose tuition fees are minimal or free. Why would you be paying $50,000 at a state university in the United States? And we need to be thinking along that. So that competition of free education by some countries and universities with excellent qualifications, and UNESCO is leading the charge on trying to come up with recognition, universal recognition of university accreditation. The convenience was mentioned both for faculty, especially think of the rise in the numbers of contract faculty. Now people are traveling from, or last year at any rate, a course on Monday in Ottawa, Tuesday in Queens, and on Thursday in Sudbury. And so this kind of thing where we can have access to great professors delivering courses all around the world. It's also the student expectation. Those who more and more will be taking high school even in blended way, they're not going to miss the idea of certainly the hybridized world. Now, I mentioned that universities students go to experience others, different worldviews. Magnify that by 10, where the social life of the university can be experienced on a virtual global basis. Think of, right now we rely on international students, but through the internet, there are ways in which international students can greatly increase the numbers, from those who can afford to come to York to those who want to take courses in York, and the blended set up working groups that will be there. Right now, there are roughly 5.3 million international students that are taking courses globally. And by 2040, the prediction is that 5.3 will become 30 million. Think of the rich learning pool that we could put together. So yes, there are many issues, and a few universities will become totally virtual, such as Phoenix. But also think of the Virtual University of Pakistan, which was founded by the government more than 10 years ago as a not-for-profit and focused as in many ways on improving the quality of their nation's professors. And by identifying the top professors in the country, regardless of their institutional affiliations, and requesting to develop and deliver handcrafted special courses. The Virtual University of Pakistan aims at providing the very best courses, not only to its own students, but students all across the country and observed by the professors around the country. Now we do, if we start moving online and developing this international, I think we have to be very careful to address neocolonialism. The Virtual University of Africa, for instance, ran into the problem because in order to be accredited, it was Western universities and so on. And so that whole ugly aspect of what becomes a true university in their own being. If we were to create the University of the Arctic, how much control would local people and so on have? And we do have the University of the Arctic, and they seem to be doing extremely well by keeping the hands there in their local being. Now, rethinking education itself is underway under the guidance of an international commission called the Futures of Education, Learning to Become. UNESCO is grappling with the challenges that the future holds in store and to inspire change and issue policy recommendations for all levels of education. And the Commission identifies the extent and the rate of global change and examines the appropriate response by education systems at all levels. With the accelerated climate change and the fragility of our planet is becoming more and more apparent. Persistent inequalities, social fragmentation, and political extremism are bringing many societies to the point of crisis. And hence this week is the week recognizing the Sustainable Development Goals. And they are saying that advances in digital communication, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology have great potential. But the Commission also again raises serious ethical and governance concerns, especially as the promises of innovation and technology change have a very uneven record, in contributing to human flourishing. So it's not a fait accompli, but the trajectory is there. And those of us in higher education need to be in the forefront with our hands on the steering wheel and not simply sitting in the back seat and the recipient. So I think that most universities will continue to bolster their growth in a hybrid fashion, except those that are specifically designed and needed for particular aspects. For instance, work with indigenous populations spread out over large areas, or specific institutions that are looking into aspects of commerce and so on. So universities such as Wageningen and in Holland, it's one of the top 10 universities in the Netherlands, and prestigious rankings, Times Higher Education, largely online. The Free University of Berlin and Stockholm University, Trinity College in Dublin and Ireland. These are examples in Europe. We have many in the United States, Harvard, MIT, Virginia Tech, and so on, all putting top quality knowledge and information that is out there. Now, I agree. Assessment's troublesome. Who are we really assessing? In Turkey, I was working with a faculty of education that has 1 million students online. It's a virtual one. But their faculty travel for about 10 days in the spring and go and hold in-person examinations. They travel all around the country on special times. So the assessment, I say, is troublesome. Concern for students being able to actually appraise the reliability of the knowledge they find on the internet, as well as the difficulty of teaching soft skills. While there are many tasks that machines and technology and so on can do faster and more accurately than humans, the soft skills, such as creativity and imagination, these are not as easy to duplicate and replicate. Critical thinking is a skill that generally nurtured in students at university. Now, in a post-truth era, it will become a key competency in the human capacity to reason or develop concepts and arguments. It will carry a lot more value. And hopefully, team learning comprised of global students working together will be very, very helpful as we examine the worldviews that are needed, the changes in worldviews that are needed to be clarified, identified, and try to develop as we address global change. The pedagogy of online teaching with all these issues, though, is really accelerating, changing, and racing ahead. Not only the technology of carrying out experiments virtually and so on, but the shift is there from teaching of a single isolated discipline to a transdisciplinary approach, addressing complex issues and regarding their current lives and their future. I think one of the greatest benefits is that by this kind of approach, we are assuming the student is assuming the responsibility for their own learning. They will make or fail. There won't be quite the coaching that is there. So the idea of active learning in the class, with if it's graduate school with 15 to 20 students, yes. If it's undergraduate, the idea of active learning when you're sitting at one of 200 in a lecture hall, I don't see that. I see that the small group online, as well as access repeated to classes and so on, is great. So in closing, I posit education will undergo this profound transformation, of which the early signs are evident in the already widespread experiences of e-learning and the pedagogical approach in hybrid classrooms. The ease of not only physical access, but students finding information easily by submitting a few key search words will bring knowledge to many additional students who would never dream of going to university and would otherwise not have access to the life that quality, ongoing education can fulfill. So it's a matter of universities providing a service of knowledge, reliability, and usefulness for the present generations, yes. But it's also of universities' ability to ensure the protection of future generations by ensuring the education of the current one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. Our next speaker is Jennine.
Thank you. So thank you, James, for the opportunity to speak. It's just wonderful to hear all the different opinions and to find that balance where we all end up, but it's been very interesting, and welcome to the students and any staff and faculty who have joined us as well. So my perspective is a bit more looking at the entire student as an individual. So I come, of course, from a psychology background and a clinical psych background. So the challenge of going last is you have to integrate your points plus kind of refute some of the other points. So we'll see how much I can get to. So as you know, I'm, along with David Leyton-Brown, was arguing against the statement. And I have three major points to take into account the value of the broader university experience, both in person and in the classroom in particular. So I don't think the COVID pandemic should not inconvertibly change the future of higher education. And one of three reasons is that it will inevitably decrease the importance and involvement of in-person co-curricular experiences on campus. I also think that a fully online learning experience will undoubtedly further exponentially increase the already alarming levels of poor mental health and poor well-being concerns we're seeing among our post-secondary students currently. And from a broader perspective, I think that the university experience, and I'm sure many of us can reflect on it, has been just so critical for our development. Whether it's our lifelong friendships, it's the spouses that we made, the challenges that we overcame, and a lot of that happened through our in-person experiences. So by going through an in-person experience of an undergraduate education in particular, it allows our young people across the globe to attain their developmental milestones. And without attaining those developmental milestones we know that are critical in the research, it can lead to more lifelong negative outcomes. I agree with the points that people have raised, although I think these disadvantages that I'll go through outweigh the advantages such as increased enrollment and ease of access. I also think that, of course, those things are important, but I don't think that online access to education is the best means to increase access. So instead, we could have improved government funding to higher education. We could have reductions in cost to higher education. We could have universal health, universal childcare, reduced transit costs. So why is it up to the university to open its doors to make things more accessible through an online environment, which I don't think is the best for students, whereas there could be other means, particularly through government funding or private funding, to increase the accessibility of students. So I believe there are lots of losses that are associated with particularly development of young people through online learning, and some of the gains can be attained through other means. So in addition to David's technology issues and the lack of internet access, I would add a lack of quiet space as some of the other reasons in terms of technology. I won't go too much in technology issues. So my first point, so in case you may need some convincing, do we value co-curricular experiences? So in addition to students learning in the classroom, that's predominantly why they come for a degree. But increasingly, over the past couple decades, universities and post-secondary institutions are putting more and more time and effort into the co-curricular experience. Just at our university alone, to see the value of that, our top awards on campus, such as the Robert Tiffin Award, the Murray G. Ross Award, Undergraduate Student Life Awards in LAPS or in the Faculty of Health where I am, are due to that combination of in-campus, in-person contributions to student leadership and student life, in addition to the academics. And that ties hand in hand with what we need students to know as they go into the job workforce, to have that balance of sound knowledge, the mentoring from professors and peer students, but at the same time, the soft skills to do well in their careers. And we know for new incoming students, or I suspect, it's harder to engage in those online interpersonal experiences, whereas our current students before the pandemic were already involved with us. So for me personally, it was, and I'm seeing across campus, it was kind of easier to maintain that. But I wonder for incoming students, are they willing to join a student club online when that's their main online experience? And post-pandemic, if we continue to go through an online learning environment, will they indeed reach out and join these extracurricular experiences online? And I suspect the answer will be no. As well as, so how do we other support or know the value of extracurricular experiences? Well, we and other universities have established student community and leadership development centers. We support over 350 student clubs at our university. I know that as a result of those things being lost, we see both in the online research is decreased engagement in our, not only our academics, because there is a strong relationship between academic performance as well as extracurricular involvement. So now students already after the first week are having Zoom fatigue. So, and also they're not getting that balance of maybe intramurals, the ability to connect with other students, to share their experiences, join study groups, join study clubs, all those things that are usually done in person and have the advantages of being in person. So these co-curricular experiences, and I think if you go to an online campus experience, that will lead to a reduction inevitably for in-person co-curricular experiences. And the research shows a lot of value for those in-person experiences for the development of interpersonal skills, which we know are important for career development and lifelong learning and lifelong relationships. Another way we know this is valued is that here at York and other universities, they're very explicit about their values around their education to value communication, interpersonal connection, social responsibility, community engagement. Yes, you can learn that in a classroom in terms of the knowledge, but how do you actually get students to interact with other students, other communities in person to know this is the experience, this is the human connection, this is why you're doing these things. These are the lived stories, not beyond just a computer screen. I also think many of our regulated health professions or many of the professions people go into are contingent on interpersonal skills of in-person, real life-to-life interactions. So whether it's physicians, nurses, childcare providers, lawyers, those skills need to be taught in person on campuses, and you can embed them into a clinical psychology program and a nursing program. But at the undergraduate level, students often don't know where they're going to go. So you don't want to lose out the opportunity for those students to have those one-on-one connections or those interpersonal skill development at the undergraduate level, and not just keep it for the nursing program, but ensure that all of our students, all of our undergrad students across the globe have those opportunities to develop and get feedback on their interpersonal and leadership skills from in-person experiences, so that if they go into nursing or they go into law or they go into childcare, that they're not then just having to catch up and learn all those skills within that program, which is often only 2 to 4 years. The point was raised about experiential education. I think the research is still showing the benefit to having those in-person experiences, have the feedback, have the sense of community with students. And in particular, we know from international students that often, this was mentioned by my last colleague, that university is that way when you're a new person to a new country where you learn to integrate. For me as a child of an immigrant who came to Canada, going through the Canadian university experience just validated the values that I thought Canadians had. And that was not through just sitting in my classrooms, and you hear that from international students. They want to meet students, connect, learn the values, get connected, build a social network. And those things can be difficult to do just in an online environment, where students, I think, will be pressured just to attend their classes and not participate in other things. So that's my main point in terms of looking at the role of in-person, interpersonal connections happening through co-curricular experiences, and an online environment will significantly lead to reductions in those in-person experiences. And my second point was looking at student mental health and well-being. So many of us know that prior to the pandemic, student mental health was a concern already. Half of our students are anxious across Canada. This holds for many Western countries. A third of our students are feeling anxiety, and 1/3 are having relationship problems. 1/4 of our students are taking psychotropic medications. During the pandemic, the research is always being published that this concern has increased among our students. They have increased stress and anxiety about worrying about their own health, the health of the loved ones, the negative impact of the pandemic, decreased social interactions, it's disrupting their sleep patterns. And those things cannot be addressed just in a classroom. It is difficult to get mental health initiatives in a classroom, and majority of students would be accessing in-person mental health services. So again, if there's not that connection with the campus, how will they get the mental health services? And related to that, most of the mental health services have gone online for students, even at majority of universities nowadays, but is that the best thing to do? So I feel like the cart has gone before the horse, in that we don't have enough research on the efficacy of online intervention models. A review done by a researcher Clark in 2015 only found 28 studies of online mental health interventions for 12 to 25-year-olds. So there's not enough studies to show the online interventions work for mental health. So if we were to increase the number of online courses, therefore reducing the need for in-person services, this is not the right time. There's not enough support in the research in terms of having mental health interventions offered online. We don't know if they work. At the same time, we know that there's a mental health crisis in our young people. So we have to find that balance. And right now the balance is still in-person services for young people. The research shows that. And okay, so then my last point, so in addition to the significant increase of mental health concerns of young people, that usually campuses are a way to manage the mental health concerns. We are not in a position in a pandemic to manage that fully to what it can be. So we really, I think, need to pull back and look at how we can better address mental health before we put all of our classes online, because that's going to create a virtual campus where they cannot access the resources that are at this point in terms of evidence. And the other point, looking back at the young people who are attending. So I am coming from the perspective that the majority of our students are young people, and I appreciate that we do have a lot of mature students. So this may not fit, may not capture them right now. But the fact is that young people, and the research shows this pretty consistently in developmental psychology, that the young people attending post-secondary institutions, particularly in North America and in European countries and more developed countries, have already been exposed to excessive screen time. So since excessive screen time means more than 2 to 3 hours exposure daily, we've had scoping reviews, and the most recent one done by University of Waterloo in December of 2019 found that there is excessive smartphone use and screen time by children and adolescents up until now. And there's really no major studies that are refuting that. And there already are young people coming into university at increased risk for cognitive, behavioral, and emotional disorders. And some studies are even showing an early risk of onset dementia in late adolescence. Why is that? So we know that in a very short period of time, that even compared to children born in 1970, they started watching television in around 4 years, whereas children born in after 2000 watched TV around 4 months. And all of that impact of the increased screen time, The reduced interactions with parents and caregivers had led to brain development changes. It has led to, the research shows, that's prevalence of attentional and hyperactive disorders, anxiety disorders, and depression disorders. And being distracted by screen time can impede social learning skills as well as real life interactions are being diminished. We also know that screen time, which is done by the Canadian Pediatric Association, says no screen time over 5. So there is a lot of evidence, which is already informing guidelines for parents and caregivers and teachers to reduce screen time, and if anything, make it negative or 0 before age 5. The reality is that the students coming into university are over-screened and are using excessive screen time, which is already impacting their development, which is we are seeing in their increased mental health issues. And it also has an impact, particularly if students are using 7 or more hours of screen time, which now they are doing in terms of the pandemic. It can lead to thinning of the cortex, impact on cognitions and memory, and an increased use of substances such as marijuana. So we have these students who are disadvantaged from a screen time, the first in our generation in human history. About 95% of teenagers in North America are already using the internet daily. And now we are telling them, whereas university was the opportunity to really get off your screen, meet in person, and perhaps even change the trajectory of young people. So we had the opportunity to have in-person classes. We had the opportunity for them to develop the leadership skills. And where their trajectory was going this way, we could kind of take it off and maybe put it this way. And universities had a critical role in this, and I think we're doing that very well. But if you go to an online learning environment, my mind and the mind of researchers, particularly in developmental areas, are saying that this screen time and the negative effects of it are going to continue. You will see more mental health problems. You will see a lack of ability to interact. You will see more of an apathy in terms of environmental issues. And that is the concern of researchers. And the messaging is, yes, the pandemic has accelerated things, but if there was not a pandemic, how would this be done in a more thoughtful way? Would it be 20 years down the line as opposed to one over a weekend where we changed online, in terms of being more thoughtful, how we can increase the access that online resources could give us, but at the same time not being detriment to the development of our young people, particularly their neurobiology and their relationship processes, etc. Sorry, just catching up. And then the other point, the last point I'll make, I think, am I okay for time? I just 1 minute, I know it's 3 o'clock, is that emerging adults. So emerging adults are this ages of 18 to 30. And this is where universities are geared to work with majority of this population and have a role, I think, in terms of development. And the key developmental milestones you want of emerging adulthood are getting some increased space from your family, some more independence, developing your romantic relationships, finding your career, developing foundational knowledge in terms of your area of program of study. By moving things to an online environment, you're perhaps impacting the lifelong developmental trajectories of young people. They are staying at home. They are not getting that divide from their family to be independent. They're less likely to perhaps meet their romantic partners online. They are less likely maybe to have the job skill set in terms of the soft skills, be ready to go into the job workforce. So university is not just about the in-course experience that you're getting, but it's also looking at those developmental milestones that naturally happen in universities. And moving to a fully online environment could detrimentally impact those developmental milestones and extend them to not to happen to their 30s. So to sum up, I think the COVID pandemic should not change the future of education, and by going to a fully online virtual model would decrease the importance and involvement of both co-curricular experiences. It has the high likelihood of increasing the alarming levels of poor mental health and well-being that we already see in our post-secondary students, particularly because we're now solidifying that trajectory of online screen time, which has already been a disadvantage to this generation. And in turn, it can change the developmental trajectory of young people, perhaps to more negative lifelong outcomes. Just to address some of the points that were raised earlier. I think I said them earlier. So I think some of the reasons people are saying like access and higher enrollment, I don't know if online learning is the best way to do those things versus government funding, making transit cheaper, et cetera. And the other thing I'll raise is that if internet access and online learning was the main way to increase accessibility, then our First Nations community would be accessing higher education. There is internet in many of those communities, but we know there are many other barriers to just accessing education. So I think just making it accessible via the internet is not the best way forward in terms of particularly engaging our populations that are at risk for university and post-secondary education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennine. Now, I know we lost some time because of the incident that occurred previously. So if everyone's agreeable, can we take some questions from the audience? And then there might be an opportunity for responding from each of the speakers to each other as well, perhaps, and then we can do a poll. So are there any questions from the floor? Well, I don't see any hands being raised unless there is, let me just double check here. Yeah, none of the participants have raised a blue hand, so I'll open the floor for any of the speakers to respond to any of the arguments or comments made by any of the other speakers. Norma Sue.
Yes, I mean, I think we're all aware that there are challenges, and there are challenges always around technology. However, looking forward, when David Leyton-Brown addressed, the 700-year history, lots of things have shifted over that time, and I do think that books are wonderful, but not everyone accesses information in the same way. And I do think that the very sort of multimedia, for lack of a better word, approach, or having multiple forms of information available to students and from multiple sources, I think actually does enrich any course. Of course, that could be done in person in various ways, but it still means that students will be accessing the information perhaps outside of the actual class time. What I think though concerns me more about both Jennine and David Leyton-Brown's responses is there's a conflation in some cases of our very specific situation right now in the midst of a pandemic and how things may unfold as we go forward. So for example, if students were to have more access to online, whether it be blended or fully online courses, and they're not physically close to a specific campus, there's nothing precluding them from forming connections, having co-curricular experiences, and even having mentors in their own environment. So I don't want to assume that just because they're not with us on our campus, that some of those opportunities automatically get lost. I'll leave it at that, just because other people may want to respond as well. So.
Does anyone want to respond to those comments?
I agree with you. This made me reflect on, I think, the valuable role of our communities. I live in Mississauga, so you do end up getting a bit more integrated into your community because you're not going to your work environment so much. And I think that lends itself to communities doing a bit more to support the young people in school, not just the universities doing it. I think it's a great point and important to do.
I'd like to respond to a couple of points. First, Norma Sue's closing comment that nothing prevents a co-curricular experience of mentoring or other interaction in one's local location if one is not present at the campus. and that's true. But it also speaks to one of the points I made initially. The self-starting independent learner will take better advantage of that opportunity than the person who is less confident, less self-assertive, less sure of how to reach out to make that kind of connection if it is not structured and provided. And in some ways, then that reinforces the undesirable differential impact. Charles Hopkins talked about education being too precious to be left to the elites, and I couldn't agree more. But this is another example where not so much the socioeconomic elite, but the independent learner elite will benefit from that kind of self-directed opportunity in a way that other learners might not. Finally, I'd like to pat Jennine on the back, my colleague with whom we did not collaborate in advance, for making a point I wish I had made, that education is or higher education is so much more than the courses that you take to satisfy the requirements for your degree. Jennine enumerated many of those other benefits, personal, social, and otherwise. And it's true. Some self-starting independent individuals will achieve those benefits whether they go to university or not, and certainly if they go to an online university, but some will not. And the best way to provide the widest range of benefit to the widest number of students is through personal proximity. Neither Jennine nor I argued against the benefits of some online education. And, the technological developments of the last few decades, and certainly the last few years, have driven that home remarkably. We will never go back and remove the internet from the educational experience. But neither will we replace the in-person university experience with an entirely online one.
Charles.
Yeah, I think the point that I was trying to make was I'm thinking about higher education as a concept that has been irrefutably changed. In the 700 years and so on, we're like 10 years into the potential of expanding higher education through technology, through artificial intelligence with mentors and so on. There is an awful lot yet to be done, but I don't think we're going back. So I think higher education as a concept will be made up of, yes, those institutions that are totally online. There will be some. There will be the blended or hybrid approach. There will be the totally in-person ones. And then there'll be specialized approaches, the polytechniques that are already there, that will be able to reach out further. There will be special approaches because of online for adult lifelong learning, for upskilling, upgrading, and so on. I'll be really interested to see the approach of the new Markham Center campus and how they will blend back and forth between Glendon and Keele and so on. There will be those that will really specialize just in the personal fulfillment of humanity, right? And then there will be the higher education aspects that really will focus on community development, The Markham Center could be one. Our relationship is growing greatly with Peel and the city, and as they are growing and developing, so the interaction of the university with hands-on experiential learning and so on in these kinds of settings, as well as the remote. So I think that the online, where you can place something and people can access it at different times, and when it is convenient, they can discuss it, they can come back, instead of the only arrow in the quiver being the fixed site. There will be ways of, yes, the global interchange, and there will be ways of perhaps faculty or students coming for part of a year, for a summer course, for whatever, and meeting. It is great if they can meet in person first before they go out to do their online networking and so on. But we're 10 years into this. But I don't think we're ever going to turn around and come back. We're going to try and address the issues, move forward, and as a result, I think society will be much better served by higher education. Thanks.
I have a question to pose generally to everyone. I take your point, Jennine and David, that interaction is really key. The face-to-face interaction in particular that you're talking about, in terms of not only the mental well-being of students, but also in terms of the educative process as well. There's something that perhaps happens in a face-to-face environment that can't be replicated in an online or remote environment. But I'm wondering whether or not technology might continue to evolve, whereas Charles indicated assessment now is a real problem in terms of evaluating students in terms of their courses, and people are looking at alternatives. That's one of them. And another one that I hope that might be solved is the cost, in terms of hopefully the technology will become cheaper and cheaper over time as it expands, but also to prevent certain incidents like we experienced today from ever happening. These kinds of technical issues are resolved. So if you could, do you see technology advancing to such a degree that we could actually address your particular concerns in terms of interaction, whether in terms of mental well-being or also in terms of the educative process?
Let me just take a first crack at it. Certainly technology will continue to advance. If I think 20 years ago, approximately, when I was Dean of Graduate Studies, we were just beginning to dip our toe into the water of online video conferencing. And the first experiments in an online thesis defense were undertaken. Rather than fly an international expert in from another continent, could we simply connect electronically to that person? And unfortunately, those initial experiments did not go well. The technological problems, the loss of connection in the middle of the exam caused great distress to the candidates whose future was being evaluated. And it was a few years later that it became a regular part of the conduct of business. We have Zoom calls now that are, for all of the technological problems, vastly better than what was available 5 years ago. I would not venture to predict what things will be like 5, let alone 20 years from now. It might be that we will have holographic interaction opportunities that are indistinguishable from what today we would call face-to-face interaction. It might be that we will have matter transmission, that we can move instantaneously with no cost of transportation and commuter time. Who knows what the technological advances will be? But at the moment, there are the technological limitations, and even when they do not exist, the access to the technology is not sufficiently evenly distributed. It disadvantages significant proportions, not just of our society, but of the world population. A generation, 2 generations from now, who knows where we will be? Better than we are now, but who knows?
I think there's probably this optimal amount of online that works best for a university student. And if it's based a little bit on what optimal screen time, so screen time would say, 4 hours is a lot of time to be, even for us, like we don't really talk about faculty members, but we're also on screen now a lot too. So I think it's just letting the research tell us what is the optimal time for a young person and maybe an older, mature university student to be online in terms of facilitating all the different types of learning they need to do. And that optimal amount of time may be developmentally different for a first-year student. So we may say, okay, first year, everything as much as possible in person. So at least we've built the connections with you. And by the time you get to 4th year, maybe we'll decrease the amount of in-person, because now we've built your relationships, you have your communities and connections, and you're a bit busy as you're looking for your career. So then 4th year, we have more online time. So I would kind of look to the research. Yes, it's going that way, but I would just try and implement it in a developmental way that works to optimize the experience and the lifelong functioning of a young person attending university.
I see we have a hand up, Andrew.
Yes. It seems today that we have discussed the concept of the university as essentially providing 2 things. One is the actual academic instruction, the learning, the content. And the second is the social aspect of it. And that everything from physically just seeing people to participating in co-curricular clubs, to just being in a room with the people that you're learning with. I guess my question is, to what extent is the university responsible for providing that personal social experience? Because if that is where our primary concern is, that's different than having a primary concern about, is the technology good enough, so to speak, that the students can actually learn with it? It would seem to me that those are 2 different questions, and almost the way you would go about solving them might be through 2 different ways. I would be curious to get to get the panel to weigh in on this.
I don't mind going first, if that's okay. I do think that there are many of us at the university who we want to educate the whole person. We want to nurture the whole person, and that includes the emotional, the social, and the academic. The truth of the matter is, though, at a university like York, there are very few of our students actually who remain on campus outside of their class times. I have heard of stories where students literally, they come to campus, they try to get as many courses in one day as they can, and they leave. The colleges, probably, Andrew and James, you might have stats that, we have, at least in the past, had tremendous challenges in getting our commuting students to stay on campus long enough to participate in ways that we would really like them to participate in. And it's partly because of the demographics. They have long commuting times. They have jobs that they need to get to. Their whole life is not at the university, which again is very different than the traditional Ivy League university where students lived on campus. It was a small group, that was their world for 4 years, and then they graduated and off they went. that is no longer the reality. Maybe it's never been the reality at York. It might be the reality at some very small Ivy League schools. But for the majority of young people in the world, that is not an opportunity that they're going to be able to avail themselves of. So I do think that even if we have a primarily blended or online environment, we as individuals, as faculty members, as staff members, can work with students in ways to help them cultivate those skills, that it doesn't necessarily have to be within our own physical environment.
If I could follow that up, I spoke in my opening comments about the research associated with student success, and I particularly focused on active learning. The research actually identified two key variables, of which active learning was only one. The other variable was the involvement in some on-campus activity outside of class. It didn't seem to matter what that activity was, whether you played on a sports team or sang in a choir or were a member of a club or part of student government or whatever. The key was being involved in something that linked you and engaged you with the wider institution. The research is clear. Not only is your level of satisfaction with your experience greater if you have that kind of involvement, but you get higher grades, you do better academically. It balances your university experience. And Norma Sue is unfortunately very correct. The majority of York's students in particular do not have that kind of involvement. That's why the colleges exist at York. But it's not only the task of the colleges. As Jennine pointed out, there are 300 or 400 recognized student clubs at York. But a majority of York students are not involved with any one of them. And so if students do not choose themselves to provide that advantage to their learning experience, are there other ways, as Norma Sue was saying, that we can help them to develop that skill and that benefit? Well, yes, it isn't as good as what the research shows is the best way, but maybe we will get better over time.
Could I respond just very briefly? Yes, active learning and student engagement is not limited to university. That goes all the way from preschool through life. Right? The other aspect in there is perceived relevance of what they are learning, and perhaps there is hope that through online and tailoring courses and so on, that we can engage in local relevance and boost that to make up for what the shortfall in others. Thanks.
I agree with you 100%. Like, we're not getting the students, and there's reasons for it. But I also feel like York being, and I know we're not supposed to talk about just about York, but here we are, wasn't there yet. I think there was an opportunity, and I think the pandemic has really, at least in Calimane-Stong, like has forced us to think, how are we going to engage these commuting students? And there's different things you try, but I think the online is a way to engage them, and co-curricular in terms of academic support could work very well online for commuting students. But I also think I wouldn't give up quite yet. I think from the many students, and again, this is anecdotal, but the research supports that the involvement in extracurricular is advantageous. And the many students who do commute, I do hear from them, once they get involved, they're like, oh, it was such a better experience when I did get involved. And I think we're maybe the pandemic will put us in a better position to reach out and be more accommodating to those commuting students. So at least they're doing at least orientation, like at least they're doing some salient couple few things that we think are the best bet for them to get engaged with us. And it's not a done deal yet in terms of engaging the commuting students. I feel like we're on a momentum to do that.
Well, we're quickly running out of time. We're nearly at 3:30. So this is probably time to do our poll. So Andrew, if you could action the poll, and I'm not going to vote, incidentally, but I'm inviting everyone else to participate in the vote. So Andrew, please.
I don't have that capability. I'm not a
Oh,
host
well,
of
let's
the
see if,
meeting.
I hope I still have it. Oh, I don't. Oh dear.
It was a tie.
You'll have to.
I could tell.
Yeah, I forgot, we switched,
Right,
we
because you made a
switched
new meeting.
links, so we've lost the poll capacity. I'm sorry about that.
We could do like a show of, we could do a show of hands.
Okay,
with the
that's a good idea.
reactions.
That's a good alternative, but that's no longer a secret ballot, but go ahead.
Fair enough.
All those in favor of the proposition, and do I need to repeat the proposition? Will the COVID pandemic change inconvertibly the future of higher education from the traditional in-person, on-site mode of delivery to remote and/or online virtual modes of delivery? All those in favor of the proposition, please raise your hand. I count 5. Okay, thank you. Now, all those opposed to the proposition, and you can't vote twice, please. I count 4.
Oh, wait a minute.
I didn't vote at all. Am I allowed to vote?
I voted.
Yes, I think you are.
Okay, because I
Jennine
didn't
voted.
vote. Didn't vote at all.
There was a 5. But
It
we
looks
could
like it's tied, but I am not going to exercise breaking the tie. Thank you very much. First of all, I'm very grateful deeply grateful to our 4 debaters for their willingness to join us in this inaugural debate. It's really been quite memorable for many reasons. I never experienced this before. I can honestly say that. But the debate on the future of higher education, which is really quite relevant. And it's a great way to start off the McLaughlin College Union. If anyone out there is interested in being part of the McLaughlin College Union, please send me an email. I welcome your participation as we continue to develop more of these debates. And I can let you know now that we're already begun planning for the second debate, which will be in November. The date and time is to be announced. Hopefully we won't have the same experience, but at least we'll have a backup plan in terms of what to do in that instance. So just as a teaser for everyone, the next debate is likely to be on artificial intelligence. So more information on that to come. We also welcome everyone's participation, of course, in the other activities at the college, particularly our popular lunchtime talks. There'll be one this Friday, which is a virtual book launch. Please join us for that. We also have other, of course, lunchtime talks throughout the term. And for all the students that are out there, if you attend 6 of our talks, you get a McLaughlin College certificate. If you attend 10 or more, you get our certificate of honor. And we do have a random draw for students, a book prize for attending the lunchtime talks as well. So I want to thank everyone for their participation in this quite auspicious very first McLaughlin College Union debate. And I guess we had a fairly good outcome for everyone. We had a tie in terms of the results, so we couldn't do it any better than that. So thank you very much for your participation, and I look forward to seeing you at future McLaughlin College events and activities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you all very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Vicki, for organizing too.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.